I'm Kaylee.
And I'm Alondra.
And you're listening to Emergency Intercom.
On today's episode, we're going to debate gun regulations. So, on the state side, being the regulator side, we have Alondra. On the national government side, we have Kaylee. So, let's start things off. So, why exactly do you think the state should regulate gun control, Alondra?
Well, I think the states should regulate gun control because it is a right given to the states and not to the federal government, according to Amendment 10, which says any power is not given to the government or delegated to the states. Also, it does not say in the Constitution that it is a federal power to make gun regulations.
You make a good case. What about you, Kaylee?
Well, I believe that the federal government should regulate gun control because despite it not being explicitly stated in the Constitution, it could be passed through the necessary and proper clause in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. I believe the power to regulate gun control should be shifted from the states to the federal government because states have not proven effective throughout their 20,000 regulations, and there's still a continued increase in the misuse of guns across the nation.
Dang, things are getting a little heated here. Do you have any rebuttals, Alondra?
Yeah, actually, in my opinion, the federal government wouldn't know any better than the states because states know their communities better and their needs. The federal government will have issues knowing and addressing each individual state's needs since the territory is large.
Alright, let's end this discussion here before we get off topic. I'd like to ask you both a question. What can the U.S. learn from other countries with centralized or decentralized gun control systems?
Australia and the UK both have a very strong federal oversight, and this has led to the significant reduction in gun violence and misuse. In these nations, they have ensured consistent background checks, mandatory waiting periods, and consistent licensing standards across the entire country. This simplifies enforcement because there aren't any differences in regulations between states, and it closes loopholes that might have been otherwise exploited. Having a uniform federal level approach to gun regulation reduces illegal firearm movement and enhances national public safety outcomes.
That is not true. Other countries, like for example Switzerland, one of the most heavily armed countries in the world, is considered to be one of the safest countries. If Switzerland made it work, the United States could make their decentralized gun regulation work as well. If the entire country works to make a safer place like Switzerland did, it can happen, which is not impossible because we are red-blooded Americans. Switzerland works hard to prevent terrorism through monitoring and investigations. The states could continue to regulate gun control and keep their power to regulate guns with stricter monitoring and investigations as well. We do not need a nationwide regulation, but stricter laws within each state.
Switzerland only has 23 guns per 100 people, and they're mainly used for hunting. But in America, it's 120.5 guns per 100 people. 38 of those say it's hunting, while 67 say it's protection. It's for protection. There's already a huge difference between the intention of gun ownership and the percentages of gun that we would have to regulate. There are many more differing opinions in the U.S. than in Switzerland because Switzerland has half the states and only 2.6% of the population the U.S. has. This big of a compromise is not possible for the U.S., therefore it should be a federal mandate that guarantees every state has stricter gun control laws.
Alright, good point. On to the next question. How could state versus federal regulation impact law enforcement?
Because of uniform regulations, law enforcement would be simplified and allow all levels of government throughout all different regions to collaborate more efficiently and effectively because there wouldn't be differences in regulations between regions. Federal regulation would also make it easier to have a central database for tracking firearm sales, ownership, and lost/stolen firearms, allowing law enforcement to be more efficient in tracing weapons used in crimes. All officers would be under the same guidelines, which would increase coordination and public safety.
Actually, I disagree because states know what resources their law enforcement needs to do their jobs. Meanwhile, the federal government is going to make a blanket statement, and some states won't get the resources they need due to the federal government being unaware of those exact needs. It may be beneficial to have all officers working under the same guidelines, but it would be even more beneficial if this were concentrated in small groups to most effectively work under the same guidelines and focus on a state-specific issues.
Well, I don't care if you disagree.
Well, you just mad I'm right.
Oh, ladies, break it up. Let's take a 10-minute break. we're back now. Do you guys have anything to start us up with?
Well, I still believe Alondra's wrong because, as it's been proven, the states don't know what's best for them. Like, there continues to be misuse in guns and firearms, and there continues to be loopholes despite the thousands of regulations between all the states.
Well, I still don't agree with you because of what is mentioned in the Constitution. Like I said, it doesn't give you the right to regulate gun laws. That is our right, as I said in the 10th Amendment. To add on, allowing the federal government to regulate gun laws gives them too much power and disrupts the balance of power between the federal government and the states.
All right. Well, this is my final question for you both. How would federal gun regulations impact urban and rural communities?
Well, some states and cities are more dangerous than others. Each state has needs that can be met under one federal decision. For example, some states have more wildlife, especially in rural areas that are deadly to pets and humans, such as black bears and brown bears, alligators, mountain lions, panthers, crocodiles, and coyotes. Guns are needed to protect people who live in these rural areas, and if a nationwide ban were put, those who live in these places would be left defenseless.
Well, on the national side, uniform laws across all communities would close loopholes that allow firearms to be brought into cities from regions with more lax regulations. Urban areas would benefit because it would be easier to enforce gun laws and track firearms. In rural communities, where guns are associated with hunting and self-defense, federal regulations could be seen as overreaching. Rural communities could feel that federal laws don't account for their specific needs, like Alondra mentioned. However, federal regulations in these areas would only be to ensure safe practices and standardized training that provide rural areas with a responsible use and ownership of guns. The balance of regulation to benefit both types of populations would be the main challenge, but I believe that it's possible.
Now that you've all had a chance to hear both sides of the story, should the national or state governments decide on gun regulation issues? Personally, here, we think that the national government should regulate guns because Kaylee's argument, it was the most reasonable in our opinion. Our main takeaway is that having a unified response would allow for less violence within our nation, which is like one of the biggest issues in America right now. Anyways, that just wraps it up for us here at Emergency Intercom, and on today's episode, we learned that regulating guns is not as simple as you might think. There are two sides to every problem, and we hope that you have learned something new from this podcast.
Thanks for joining us today. Signing off for Emergency Intercom, I'm Kaylee.
And I'm Alondra.
And I was your moderator, Aline.
Stay classy, y'all.